who wants to have an impersonal experience? You have no connection to it. The self is not impersonal. It's personal, even though it's silence. It's your personal silence. You own it. You own it. And it's not an it. It's an I. I am that. The self is not an it. It's not a thing. It's your experience. That's why I say it's personal. Hi.
Hi, Harry. Lovely to meet you. Welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And thanks to Rick Archer for introducing me to you. So the first question I ask every guest is this. What is your definition of awakening? As this word is being used around, and it may mean different things to different people. So I want to be clear about what you mean by awakening.
Awakening is very simple. It's actually exactly the same for everybody, but everybody experiences it differently. Because the awareness of the self is universal, it's unbounded, it's everywhere. So everybody already has it, but they don't know it. The first prerequisite for being awake is being born, because every aspect of life is a percentage of self-realization. Okay, so maybe a little percentage, a bigger percentage, and at some point it becomes known. Most people, especially seekers, and most of the people on, these kind of meetings are seekers. That's why they're here. They're looking for something beyond their normal life. And you could actually say that realization is normal. What isn't realization isn't normal. It's less than normal. Okay? So, here's a little story to describe, So, I met this lady 2 years ago from France. She came to Fairfield. This is where I am here. And she had heard of me somewhere. And she came to the door, walked in the house. I said, "Hi, come on." And we went into the living room, and she sat down and she says, "Harry, I have no idea what self-realization is. I've been doing, spiritual practices for decades. I don't know if I have what I have. Tell me why, after all these years doing good techniques, I'm not awake." And so I asked her, "So you have no silence or stillness inside?" And she said, "Well, I've got that." And I said, "Whoa, what's that?" She said, "It's nothing." "Oh, so somebody else is having the experience rather than you?" And she said, "No, I'm having the experience of this silence or stillness." That's the self. Her eyes got really big, and I said, "Well, you didn't know that?" She said, "No, I didn't know that." And she was getting very excited. And she said, "Well, do you have it all the time?" "Yeah, I can find it all the time. It's always there." So I said, "You're probably awake. You just don't have the knowledge of it." And she went through this process, whatever. And, she went away and she was quite excited. And she joined a meeting a month or so later. I talked to her again. And she says, "So, what happened? Is it still there? Is that silence or that stillness or that knowingness still there?" And she says, "Yeah, not only is it there, it's much, much brighter, clearer, and I'm aware of it all the time." So I said, "What do you think happened?" "I don't know," she said. And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what happened. You've had it all along, but because you didn't understand it, acknowledge it, didn't understand it, it's like having money in the bank with no access to it. You can't use it, can't spend it, can't get any benefits from it." So I asked her, "So have you had any benefits? Do you feel better?" I said, "Yeah, husband, says, what happened to you? And I said, well, the thing about realization is it doesn't feel like realization. You could even say that, realization is a concept. Then when you get it, it's just too natural and normal and just there. It's nice, it's simple, it's quiet, and you recognize it because it's the first thing in your life that's permanent. Everything else is changing, doing this, doing that. The self, the realized self, is always there. Maybe you have to find it or notice it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people say things like, another person who woke up said, I feel like I've arrived home. And some big weight lifted off. I don't know what it is. Well, how about calling it realization? I know that's kind of funny, but they nearly always say, no, that's too simple. That can't be. That can't be. So, well, too bad. That's what it is. It's the first. It's the first step. You have to realize the self. Most people go through life, I don't know. If you think about, we went to school, went to public school, high school, college, we graduated. Never did anybody ever mention realization. Now, the word never came up. So we weren't educated in any way. We were educated to live a life, have a career, get married or whatever we want to do. And, but nobody ever mentioned realization. You have to do that on yourself. You have to become a secret by yourself. Nobody's going to start you. You have to start on the journey. You have to take the first step, right? And
that's such a great news.
Well,
many people, because there's so many ideas about this, and
they have no idea, which is really funny, right? Okay, so I seem to be into stories today. I'll tell you another little story. So this is another couple from Canada. I grew up in Canada, so I have a lot of Canadian friends. This couple visited me. They were seekers, and they did meditation processes a long time. They were my age. And so we were having dinner. We got up from the dining table and we started going into the living room. And for no reason whatsoever, I just looked at Sue, that was the lady's name, and I said, Sue, you don't know who I am, do you? And she literally froze, stopped walking, her eyes got really big, and then she continued walking to the living room. She sat down and she said, Harry, what did you do to me? I said, I didn't do anything, honest. I didn't do anything. She says, something happened to me. It's like something I've never realized before. This kind of, I don't know. It's like something fell away, some big phenomenon that seemed to be a weight on my life. It disappeared, and suddenly I felt what? I can't say unbounded, but I felt big and sort of happy. And the first thing I said, well, let's see if it lasts. Sounds great. Let's see what it is. And then we discussed it for a while, and she went back to her home in Toronto. And again, I met her. She came back 3-4 months later. And she said, I asked her, is it still there? And she said, yeah, it's still there. It's bigger, it's better. I now recognize it all the time. I can find it. And I said, that's great. And what do you think happened? She says, I said, do you think you woke up? Well, it sure feels like that, but it's not what I expected. It's much simpler, much just more natural, just there. I like it. Feels good. Now, this is half the story. The other half is the husband.
All right. Okay.
So the husband, she in her life, she's never had any flashy experiences. She had no idea what realization is or anything, and but, she's just plodded along with her meditation practices, her spiritual practices. The husband, on the other hand, has had for a long, long time, decades, very flashy experiences, gods, angels, everything. And I always tell them, that's great. They're flashy experiences. Love them. There's certainly indication of, you know, developed consciousness, but they're not self-realization because they come and they go.
Mm-hmm.
You have them and then they go. And he's always says, yeah, they come. But she looked at me, or he looked at me and said, Harry, how come my wife woke up? He was being half joking, and I did. She hardly does any practices. She hardly had any experience. I have all this flashy stuff, and she woke up, and I didn't. What happened? Well, I told you, David, that flashy experiences are terrific. But they're not self-realization. Self-realization is that area of consciousness that's in between flashy experiences, in between everything. It's pervasive. It's always there. You didn't have that. So, of course, he says, I know. Okay, so he got very focused, let's say, for the next year. He went through a process. So I went through this kind of process with most of my friends until I didn't have any friends anymore. They were all, a different relationship to me now. And then I started groups, years ago. And, what I realized is that almost every sincere seeker has some experience. They don't give it much value. They need to almost be told, almost be convinced that they have something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to myself, if all we have to do is talk about self-realization in the right way, of course, and people wake up, I'm going to start some groups. And so I did. That was years ago. I guess that's my definition of the first stage of self-realization. It's simple, natural, it's there. You don't recognize it normally.
It's too close and too natural.
It's so natural. Yeah. Well, it has to be natural. It's the ground state of human consciousness.
Right.
It's just there. It's just there.
Yeah,
It's not used to
that
it.
silence, that beingness.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm. Oh, if some people would say it's nothing.
Well,
Well,
I have
feels
a
like
slight
nothing.
problem. I have
Right?
the slight
Huh?
problem with the word nothing.
Okay,
Let me tell you why.
tell me.
Okay, so many people say, well, I do have this sense of nothingness there. And what did you just say? Did you say you have this sense of nothingness?
Mm-hmm.
So you recognize you're having the experience? And they say, yeah. So it's not nothing, it's your experience. And they say, yeah, I guess it is. It's not a chipmunk having the experience, it's you having the experience, correct? And you call that nothing. I call that everything. I call that self-realization. Okay? Yes, there's a huge, you could call it nothing because there's no, There's no differentiation. You could say it's unbounded, it's silence, it's stillness, but all those experiences are you having it. It's not silence, it's your silence, it's your stillness. That old Vedic saying, I am that. It didn't say nothing is that, it says I am that. Okay? I call that something. That's the beginning stage of self-realization. It's great. It's terrific. But I don't use the word nothing. Some value. Do you like it? Yeah. It's always, oh, it's good. Some benefit. Oh, yeah. Nothing doesn't do that. Well, that's my experience with everybody anyway.
Mm. Well, I saw that you published a couple of books, and one is called universal consciousness is profoundly personal.
That's
right.
yeah.
This is an interesting
Since you
subject.
mentioned it, there it is.
Okay, yes.
Right. And then
Profoundly personal.
yes, and then I did a first book years ago. It's this one.
The
What does
Landscape
it
of
say? The
Enlightenment.
Landscape of Enlightenment. Yeah, this is a little bit more like a biography and experiential, and the other one is a little more knowledge based. But yeah, I started writing about consciousness as a way to share it with people, and but generally speaking, almost everybody I meet not only has the potential to wake up, they're actually very close to the state already. Very, very close. You could even say they already have it, but what's missing is the understanding. I think understanding is what? Undervalued.
Interesting.
Because meditation is great. You gotta settle down, and you have to refine the nervous system a little bit, and you refine your thinking and this and that, and you do that in meditation, or you do it in some spiritual practice. But that's a practice. That's like lifting weights, when you call them spiritual weights. You don't wake up during meditation. You wake up in activity. Because why do we close our eyes? So that when our eyes are open, we're awake and we have a good life and we have good relationships and all that. It's like if you're a guy and you're lifting weights, you get stronger and stronger. You don't even know how you're doing it. You're just getting stronger. It's inherent in the physical body. Inherent in consciousness is self-realization. So when you meditate or do a spiritual practice, you're kind of doing a practice. Okay, you're exercising your brain and your heart and your body and so forth, so that you can have that state permanently. Permanently doesn't mean just in a closed room by yourself. It means in activity, right? Generally speaking, the way we grow up, all of us, me included, when you look at something, you're not realized. Whatever you're looking at is 100% of your consciousness. That's it. That's all there is. But it's good. It's natural. That's what happens. In the realized state, you look at that bookcase over there or anything else, the self is there as well. That's all. That's what's changed. Something permanent is there along with your perceptions. Call that realization. So it's always the object of perception or whatever you're looking at, or the relationships you're having, no longer overshadows the self or hides it or diminishes it. It's just there. That's self-realization if it's there all the time. That's where it starts. That's the first step.
Can I come back to this profoundly personal thing? I hear people say, yeah, but it's supposed to be impersonal. Or why do I still feel like myself? Or, that word personal is something there that is confusing.
It's confusing because it's such a general misunderstanding. Well, you're a person, right? You're an individual.
Right.
You don't look like me, and I don't look, fortunately for you, you don't look like me, and so forth and so on. We're individuals. Individuals wake up.
Right.
Nobody else wakes up. Individuals wake up. If you take the individual out of the experience, you don't have an experience. The problem is, and I understand the problem quite well, because the first stage or the first awakening is simple, natural. It's still happening to an individual. Okay, so the person who's awake, he's walking around. He still has a body, a mind, a heart, personalities, idiosyncrasies, ups and downs. Those continue. So what happened to the personality? Nothing. It's still there. The problem is that the first stage, the stage of waking up to silence, stillness, the experience of silence and stillness is very abstract. It's very abstract. It feels like simplicity itself, right? Natural. It isn't related to the environment yet.
Mm-hmm.
You're not unified with anything yet. You're just, the self knows the self. I'd like to put into that yourself knows the self. Okay? Somebody's having the experience. You have to remember. Could you honestly say, let's say you're awake, could you possibly say that's not my experience? No, you could say the experience is simple and natural.
Right.
That's what you'd say. Okay, fine. It's still your experience. Now, going on from there, like I've said many times, this is the beginning.
Yes.
I would say quite often it's mistaken for the end. This is it. I've made it. I've got the silence. It's there. Boom. Nothing else required. No, you just got on the bus to go somewhere. That's all, You haven't arrived yet. You just got on the bus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's of course it's the foundational experience. I get that. No problem. You got to have self-realization. Okay? What happens after that is that as the inner experience gets clearer, let's call it an inner, it's not really an inner experience because it's unbounded or whatever, and as it gets clearer and clearer, you begin to realize that not only is it inside, it's also outside. You start seeing some connection within the self, within the silence. Silence is kind of overrated a little bit, It's beautiful and I love it and it's great and it's always there. But the purpose of that silence is to have it in activity so it doesn't go away. Not only doesn't go away, it becomes related to the environment, becomes related to what you're seeing, tasting, touching, having a relationship, that it begins to be a connected value to how you're living your life. That would be another stage. Mm-hmm. You could call that a unified sense of consciousness. Not just inside, not just outside, but a connectedness that the inside has become the outside and the outside has become the inside and no gap between it. Now, having said that, it's not like anything happens to the relative. This is on the feeling level, on the knowledge level, right? Okay? So that would be another stage. Okay, now there's a kind of a big misconception about, at least in my opinion, is that if you're not perfect, you can't get enlightened. Well, if you're not enlightened, you're not perfect anyway, right? I mean, so you're going from a little bit more perfect as you get closer and closer. So you got problems. What happens to those problems when you wake up? What happens to the stress and the depression and the downs and the ups? Well, they get modified, but they don't disappear. What happens is the self is there along with what used to be something that overshadowed the self. It doesn't do that anymore. It doesn't matter if you have a down experience or an up experience. Oh, wait a minute, do you still have ups and downs? Well, if you're an individual and you're a human being, you're going to have ups and downs whether you're awake or not. The wakefulness means that they don't affect you that way anymore. Okay, they don't take away the self. The self is still conscious experience. Okay? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me.
All right. So, in all these, you meet with people all the time, right?
Right.
And I'm going to interview you now.
Please.
Well, what's your experience when you meet people and you help people and, you're obviously relating to what I'm saying.
Well, there's just so much to cover.
Okay.
I have been working with people on the path for, 13 years, something like that. So speaking to seekers is my everyday experience. That's kind of my practice. started
Right.
like my practice. So my experience is that to realize the self, one needs to be looking in the right way, in the right direction, which is your own experience, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And what helps is pointing to that from various angles, in different words, in different ways. Just pointing to that, look for yourself. Look for yourself in your own experience. And from my experience is that there are two major things that are in the way of realization. One thing is fear in various ways. Fear to disappear, not function, lose loved ones, and go crazy or whatever. Fear. And another one is expectations. Expectations meaning that every seeker has some ideas what this awakening or what this realization should look like, should feel like, how it is for other people. It is not like this for me. And these two things are the major obstacles. Plus, a third thing is the resistance. The resistance is that mechanism that holds the belief structure in place and doesn't let in any new idea, because otherwise everything has to reorganize itself. So it's a danger. Oh yeah, it can be fear out of that. But once the fear and expectations are kind of cleared, then it's easy.
That's right. It's beautiful. There's always two things. Something has to go and something has to come. And then, it's like if you're sitting in a dark room, you can't see anything. Turn up the rheostat a little bit and a little more bright. Whoa, this is nice. It's not just an empty space, but there's what's there. There's a feeling there. There's some understanding there. There's nice. You turn up the light. That's all. So I like what you said. Realization. Obviously, you don't know what it is. Otherwise, you'd be there. That's the misconception, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're talking about. You have high hopes that it's going to be, there's going to be angels at the door, or there's going to be some cosmic explosion of pure bliss. And, some people have that, no problem.
Yes.
But most people just go into it gradually, and then suddenly, whoa, it's there. So those are good points you're making. And people think it's going to look like this, it's going to look like that, it's going to have some specificity to it. You're going to meet God or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not that none of these things, all of these things can happen, but most of them happen over time.
Right. And the experience is unique. Our experience is unique and it's incomparable.
It's unique for everybody.
And right. Whatever happened to Eckhart Tolle or the Ashanti is not going to happen here because I'm not Eckhart Tolle.
No, it's beautiful. And I like your, what direction are you looking? At first when you start, become a seeker, you go inside, you meditate, close your eyes, whatever you do, or you do some spiritual practice. But the idea is that you want to be able to look inside and outside simultaneously. Mm-hmm. The self is not located inside and it's not located outside, it's located everywhere, as you know. And so that's what happens. You begin to have the feeling at first, and eventually you have the perception that everything is the self. But you are that everything that is the self. I think that's not emphasized, in my opinion, not emphasized enough, because who wants to have an impersonal experience? You have no connection to it. The self is not impersonal, it's personal, even though it's silence. It's your personal silence. You own it. You own it. And it's not an it, it's an I. I am that. The self is not an it. It's not a thing. It's your experience. That's why I say it's personal. You can't describe it in a specific way. You have to say, oh, it's silence, it's stillness, it's wholeness, it's a knowingness. People I have so many people talk about, well, some people see it. They see a light, oh, okay, that's one way of looking at it. Somebody says, well, I feel it. Yeah, I feel it all the time. It's great. Other people say they know it. I just know it. It's a knowingness. And they're all the same experience seen from a personal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Always somebody having the experience, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because as a default, there is this idea that I am this image, I am this person, I am this mind, I am the body, I am this object somehow. And then this I that was thought to be me is seen that is not me. But the one thing that is holding the whole thing in place, that illusion of this I being me in place, is this idea of a doer or idea of a controller, or I am in control of what happens. In the one way, this creating your own reality is true, but when it's happening unconsciously, then I can't say I am creating it. It's just showing up. It's happening. It's just patterns playing out. And there is no control over these patterns unless you become conscious of them and they leave the space.
It's a good point. Everybody has self-awareness. The question is, are you conscious of it? If you're conscious of the self-awareness and you're conscious of it all the time, that's called self-realization. When it comes and it goes, or it's not there consciously at all, then we call it something else, like ignorance. It's pretty simple. And everybody's playing the same game, Your people, my people, people on the street, everybody's looking for something. Even somebody who's not looking for a realization, they're looking for happiness, they're looking for more of this or more of that, or less of this painful stuff and more of this good stuff. Everybody's a seeker, but they don't know what they're seeking. Okay? So at some point, hopefully, people start figuring out that what they're really seeking is something they already have, and they get involved with groups or people who have this experience and can describe it to them. And you can do any kind of practice. You can pray, you can meditate. I've had people who have done nothing, but they've woken up anyway. It's very simple, and they just get there. It's more rare though. Most people do some kind of practice, because it requires some kind of refinement of thinking or refinement of the body that is pretty well spontaneous. I mean, you can't force it. You can't say, I want to be enlightened. That kind of work that way. You have to get on the journey, you have to get on the bus and start going somewhere. And where you're going, if you understand it, where you're going, it helps. If somebody can describe to you what it's like and what it isn't, and what it is, what you get and what you don't get, it helps the process a lot. That's what sort of teachers do, help the process. You're not creating the process is already there.
Beautiful.
So I started having experiences as a young kid. And one thing, probably when I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, I was already had some kind of conscious consciousness there. Didn't know what it was, of course. I assumed everybody was like that. And I lived in this kind of field of light. It was almost like a bubble. And if I put my hand outside the bubble, I would draw it in like a turtle or something, because I didn't like it out there. I liked it inside this beautiful white bubble I lived in. I was still a normal kid, though. I ran around like a chicken, like any boy does, okay? But I had this field of light around me as well. And I was always interested in what it was and what relationship this light had to life, even though I wasn't thinking consciously that way, but it was in there all the time. No young kid, girl or boy, really thinks about self-realization. If you ever watch a kid, an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, everything is totally important. They're talking about a thumbnail or something. Oh, look at that. They're totally absorbed, 100% absorbed in that. They have no idea why. They're just having a great time, but they don't know what they're experiencing. They're innocent. They're simple. They're kind of realized, but they don't have the understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But they're totally innocent. They're totally running around like a chicken. But people tend to lose that innocence, okay? That simplicity as they get older. Don't know why, they just do. But in any case, so when I was a kid, I had this light around me, and I was always interested in God. You want to talk about God for a while?
Oh, I love talking about God.
Okay, all right. All right. And, my parents took me to, religious, as a Lutheran, or my parents they weren't devout or anything, but, they did their duty and took me to church, and, I didn't get much out of that. And I knew I couldn't find God there because, it just didn't seem to be there. But I knew one thing. I knew that just a pure white light, however nice it is, wasn't God. That wasn't enough for me. I wanted more than a light. And of course, I was always an artist, so I had kind of vision of what God could be like. I never did see God sitting on a throne somewhere. That wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for something more pervasive. And I had flashes of celestial perception, where I would see this or I would see that. And I went through periods when I got a little older, which were totally divine, beautiful this and beautiful that, nonstop. But God was always somewhere a little bit distant. I could kind of sense him or her way over there somewhere, but wasn't revealing himself or herself. And as I got older, I went through a normal life. I had a job and everything else. Yeah, I was an artist, and I started a business doing art, doing design and stuff. And I had a factory when I was a young guy, and I'd be walking through this really loud factory. There were machines going all over the place. I was an owner and one of the owners, and I'd see celestial visions while the machines were running, and I said, whoa, this is pretty neat. And the point I'm making is this is a normal life, facilitates the process of waking up, not hinders it. Okay? Doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter if you're a plumber or you're an engineer or you're a doctor. You're doing stuff. That stuff is related to the self. And what started happening to me as I turned into a young fella is that I started feeling and seeing that everything I looked at, everything I saw wasn't just a silence, wasn't just a light, wasn't just a bubble of happiness or anything. It was even more than that. Self-realization is I talk about it quite differently now, because I had this sense, even as a kid, that everything is included. Everything is included in consciousness, human consciousness, everything. And I said, well, that must be God. That the first feeling of God is that everything is included. So I went through all these different stages of, if you want to call it realization. They don't feel like realization. It feels like you're in a river okay, and this river, and you're on this nice little boat. There's a beautiful river, and there's a town there. You say, oh, let's stop for a minute. We'll explore that town. Oh, very nice. So you learn about that town, and then it's okay. I'm finished with that town. You go down the river, and you're in the next town. Oh, this is a nice town too. So these states of consciousness are kind of like towns on a river. Beautiful, but it's not one town. It's a bunch of them. And each town gets a little better than the last town. Oh, this town is beautiful. And oh, there's a forest. Let's stop there for a while and wander around in the silent, beautiful forest. There's mountains. Let's do that. And then eventually you start seeing something at a distance. It looks like an ocean. Some beautiful big ocean. And you've gone through all the, this is just an analogy, okay? Analogies fall down a little bit after a time. But in any case, so all these towns, they're now in your memory. You don't forget them. This town was really beautiful, and this town, and this mountain, and this. Those are different stages of awareness, you could say. And I went through all those, and they kind of, at some point, all joined together. All joined, no gaps. The journey kind of ended, but they were all still there. And all these states of awareness, the first stage of silence and simplicity, the stage of a unified sense with the immediate environment, turned into a cosmic environment. And at some point, the whole thing started feeling, I was an adult now, it started feeling like the whole universe was in me, or I was in the universe. But, it was just as simple as self-awareness. It doesn't get any more complicated. Still the same thing, it just includes more. It's like you become the basket for everything, and it just goes in it, right? You become the basket. And at some point, I reached a point years ago, I said, okay, I kind of sense and understand and perception, to some degree, perceptually see that the whole universe has been created. I didn't create it. I knew that. So who created it? Where did it come from? I had that as a young kid, and I had it as a young adult. And it's almost like let's say you live in a small house, and then you can afford a bigger house, and then you can afford a mansion. And at some point, the whole universe becomes your mansion, and you're wandering around in this mansion. But you didn't make the mansion. You know there's an owner. There's somebody owns the mansion, and it's almost like the owner of the mansion. That's an analogy. Wants to check out who's living in his or her mansion now, and she comes and checks you out, and you finally meet God, or Goddess, or both. And this is kind of interesting. Most people, okay, so I'm talking about something, almost beyond comprehension, but it isn't. It's the same as the self, only it's taken some kind of divine form now. Silence is still there, unity is still there, the universe is still there. You're sitting in your own little room eating your pizza, that's still there. Everything is there. Nothing goes away. It just gets fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller. And then at some point you realize that you're in the presence of the Creator. And that presence is, okay, it can be divine, it can be wonderful, it can be ecstatic, you're totally devotional, but all that stuff settles down. Well, imagine if somebody comes to your door, your house, and they're in total ecstasy, on their nose, on the ground, and everything else. You'd probably close the door and say, come back another day when you're calmer, and we can have a meaningful relationship. It's a little bit like that with God, too. I know I'm getting out there somewhere, but
I love the seeds that you put in there.
All right. And then, in many ancient religions and spiritual countries, they say you become kind of you become a conduit for God's creation, and at some point, you have these qualities. You've developed these qualities. You've gone through these stages of consciousness, but you're still just a human being sitting here on Earth, and in your little house and your whatever. None of that goes away. The only thing that now happens is that everything gets personified. The silence is still there. The stillness is still there. And life gets more and more and more simple because all the answers, all the questions you had get answered. And they can't get answered from the absolute alone or from silence alone. Silence is too silent. It has to kind of get everything in it, get everything in you. You have to understand that everything is included. And that's when you start having a relationship with the Creator, and can be, every religion has their own personified values. And these personified values for me has a specific look that is totally universal though. And I think I've gone on a little tangent, right?
Keep going. Great.
Well, in any case, the experience of ultimate values, supreme values, is extremely beautiful and extremely natural. It's not, this tremendous complexity of the universe. You think things get more and more and more complex. Well, they do, but it takes all these parts, all the pieces of universal existence to make the simplicity of wholeness. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You got 1,000 pieces. They're in a big pile. That's called ignorance. And you start putting them together. You start seeing that this jigsaw puzzle has some meaning. You don't know what it is yet because you only put half the pieces together. And then when all the pieces together, guess what happens? Totally simple. One glance, you see it all. Mm-hmm. Yet it took all those pieces to make that simplicity. That's kind of what it's like, this process that I'm describing. You must be interested in God, or I wouldn't be talking about it. Well.
Yeah, but...
Do you have any questions?
About God, I don't have any questions.
No, about anything. Let's get back to Earth.
Okay, back to Earth. Seekers looking for awakening. What's your advice?
My advice is have a big vision, but be practical. So what I'm describing, okay, let's say the whole range of self-realization starts from silence, stillness. That's the fundamental experience. Gotta have that. Go for that.
Great.
Do a practice that's practical, successful, you like it, it's simple, and not complicated, so you develop self-awareness. After the self-awareness is developed, the silence is there. Consider it like the beginning stage. The reason I say beginning is because people put it way up there somewhere. It ain't. It's right in your heart and your mind and your body. Self-realization is simple. It's there. That's the first stage. And then you begin to know stuff. There's a knowledge level to it. I am that. That's a knowledge level. That knowledge level vibrates as the self. That vibration has form. You could call those the aspects of nature. Fire, water, earth, all this stuff that makes the body also makes the environment same. So you start getting a unified sense. And then that whole thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Self-realization is the first stage. Knowingness and knowledge and the divine values of creation is another stage. And then there's a unity consciousness is another stage. And then ultimately the whole universe and God. That is self-realization, that whole range, not just the silence. So be inspired by that, but start with getting the self.
Amen to that.
Okay, right?
Yes. one question that I get asked: how to stop thinking? I
I'm
hear
sorry.
that how to stop thinking, because you can't feel the silence if the
Oh, I
thoughts are
see.
here, right? How to get rid of thoughts? They are still here and they're coming.
The thing about thoughts is that thoughts will turn into self-realization too. They're part of it. They're not exclusive. They're only what? They're only a distraction if they distract you from your goal. Otherwise, they're part of life. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All your thoughts that are going on in your mind, you do some kind of practice, you get quiet, then what you get is you get your thoughts and the silence. You don't get just the silence. There's a saying I think it's in the Upanishads, it's an Indian spiritual book that says something like, I don't know the exact words, but it says, getting lost in the absolute or getting lost in the relative. If you get lost in the absolute, it's much worse than getting lost in the relative. Because in the relative, you can have a life. You can have a family, you can have feelings, you can have thoughts, you can have anything you want. In the absolute, there's nothing there. You make the absolute into something by having the experience, and suddenly that absolute value, that universal consciousness becomes what? Universally personal, becomes your experience of the self, your experience of the silence. Thoughts aren't in the way. They're part of the process of living. All you have to do is develop the self. How do you do that? Most people do it with some kind of practice. Or you find people who appear to have or have this state of consciousness where they can tell you about it, at least precisely, accurately, and then you begin to understand your experience. Hang around with people who know stuff, who know more than you, not
Good
less
one.
than you.
Good one. Yes.
It's simple, right?
Right. And
I
do
wouldn't.
you do you still have groups like meetings? People can find you and be with you?
I have 5 or 6 groups,
Aha. Wonderful.
and and I have them. Okay, since you asked me, I have a kind of a process that I do. I interview people. If somebody wants to join my group, I interview them personally,
Mm-hmm.
always, and then we have a good time. I ask them questions. They ask me questions, and if they want to join, then I put them on one of these groups. Most of my groups, the reason I have 5 groups is I like to keep them small. The largest group I have is 20 people, and the smallest group I have is 10 people. So small groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what actually happened. I've had groups for 20, 30 years, little groups, and it was just kind of a hobby. And then it started growing bigger and bigger, and then I said, well, I have 50 people. It's not personal enough. There's that word personal.
Right, right. Uh-huh.
I can do a general meeting and have 100 people, but I can't talk to anybody. 100 people is too many. And I've had these bigger groups. So I divided them up into smaller groups. And after we have an interview, person will join one of these groups. And generally speaking, I go through all these processes that I went with you, but in more detail, right? I'd say, I don't give out mantras or techniques or do darshan or pray. I just give out my experiences, and people give their experiences. And I found that, I don't know, most people at the very least start waking up, and quite a lot of people actually wake up because it's so simple. I'm not doing anything. I'm just telling them what the heck they're experiencing, and seems to work. And yes, if anybody wants to contact me, they can. They can find me, I don't know. Look me up. You'll see me somewhere.
Oh, through your website, right?
Yeah. Look at my
We'll put the
website.
link onto your website.
You can contact me if you like. If you want to join a group, that's fine. I'm pretty well open to most people, but first of all, I'm a little bit particular. That's why I interview people. They have to be kind of not serious, but decent seekers,
Sincere, perhaps.
right?
Sincere.
Yeah. No, it's great. I think there's millions of people on Earth who are ready to wake up right now. I can't handle them all, but other teachers handle people. And I think even though it seems like a really rough time on Earth, stuff going on, wars, this and the other thing, I think that's a good time to wake up to for those who want to. Okay? All right. And anything else? No. What about your groups? Or do you have a group?
Yeah, I do groups. Yes. Mostly I work individually.
Yeah. I do that too.
Yes. But I have free groups, like free meetings every month of like deep looking. I call it deep looking, which is literally meeting whatever is showing up so we can resolve. And there is another group every month as well for specifically looking at this illusion of a separate self, the separateness. Like we'll look at that. How is that possible?
Oh, you brought up an interesting point. There is a state of consciousness. Some people who go into the first stage of realization have some kind of separation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not that many, but some people, they feel that they got the self and everything else is out there.
Right.
It's separate, totally separate.
How is that even possible? But, these things need to be talked about and pointed at.
Well, it's one of those, you could say, if you have the self and it's there all the time, even if you feel it's separate, if it's there all the time, that's realization too. It's just that it's the beginning of a more unified sense of consciousness. So, but some people have that, and they have it pretty dramatically too. Yeah. So that's an interesting point. Maybe we should. I'll send you some people. You send me some people.
Wonderful. Yes, and I'm sure somebody will find you through this podcast or through the video on YouTube.
So do you have any questions yourself personally? Yes, you do. You've got to figure them out. I have questions.
Not like something burning question that I cannot sleep. I can sit and think of something, but there's nothing burning in that way that I need to seek the answer out. In my experience, what I need to know comes in, and then I know. And even if it's something, let's say, some old stuff that hasn't been seen or hasn't been looked at, it comes in, and then I know what to look at. It's like, it's all here. It's all here.
I think the understanding aspect of realization is actually quite critical, because you can get to these different stages. This first stage, I've been a speaker at a number of, even larger groups, and generally speaking, these groups are great. They take you to this first stage, self-realization, that's it, and they stop there. And I think that's not a good idea, because whatever your limitation to thinking is also your limitation to progress.
Right.
Okay. You know that. So what I do with the people that are in my groups is that I give them the vision, and then I start talking about and explaining their particular experiences in relation to that whole vision. And I'm very clear. My personal experience is this silence is the first stage. It was for me, and I had that as a child. And so I went through these various, they're not even stages, I don't even like the word states of consciousness. I like states of reality, because when you say a state of consciousness, what you're kind of talking about is sort of a point in time. And realization isn't a point in time, it's a point in universal time, a timeless state. And people start having expectations. So I'm going to get to enlightenment, and then I'm going to get to unity consciousness. Well, you do, but they're not like they're what? They're points on a river. You're moving forward. They're not permanent until they get more and more permanent as they get more and more expanded. But they're never permanent because they're always expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Even this relationship with the Creator. That position's taken. You're not going to become God, okay? You're going to get a relationship, call that supreme relationship, but still on all these paths or these ways to get there. Every country has their own way, and, historically and in modern times, there's teachers and gurus in every culture, and they take you to this level or this level, and all of them are going in the right direction, and all of them are eternal. They're all going on and on and on. Human consciousness isn't a point in time. It's an eternal, infinite phenomenon. And we are that infinite, eternal phenomenon. We're not a bunch of points in time. We're a bunch of realities that we're beginning to experience. We're not creating these realities. They're already there. And so our head doesn't get too big about all this stuff, because as you know more, you have more and more experience, you also realize you know less and less in some ways. So you get a bit of both all the time. Right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, so there you go.
Wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to talk to you, Harri.
It's been nice. Great. So you made a recording of all this, right?
Yes. And it will be on YouTube and on all podcast platforms that people like to listen on their phones and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you like, you could send me a copy of that too, and I'll post it.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay. It's been very nice talking to you. I've enjoyed it. Maybe I went a little bit on a tangent, but I always do that, so that's okay.
Oh, I say that whatever needs to be said.
Okay.
Is just said.
All right.
Complete trust and faith in that.
Very nice meeting you.
Very nice meeting you. Honestly, my honor meeting you. Thank you so much.
Mine too, and if any of your people want to know more about me, feel happy to send them my way, and I'll maybe send some people to you too.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching, for listening. If you have comments, just put them
Thank
here.
you for having me.
And I'll see you next time. Bye.
All righty. Bye.